Discover You Radio's discussions. The full spectrum. The full spectrum. Discover You Radio's discussions. The full spectrum is proudly sponsored by Counterpoint Publishing and is directed and produced under the guidance of Will Stenner. Now, let's uncover the story behind the genius of this soon-to-be legacy after this short word from one of our sponsors.
Are you an up-and-coming artist looking to grow your fan base? Then you need to check out Discover You Radio. Discover You Radio is an online radio station focused on getting you connected with potential new fans and into music executives' ears all over the world. With an online press release distributed to thousands of college radio stations and music blogs. Get heard. To submit, visit discoveruradio.com. Discover You Radio. Serious about your music? We're serious about playing it.
Welcome to Discover You Radio's discussion. Stay tuned for Dakota Freeman and Lauren Miller as they get into an intense debate regarding the subject matter as they give two separate opinions helping to build this legendary legacy.
Welcome to the debate. You know, in almost every business transaction on Earth, there is a clear, understood boundary. I mean, you go to a high-end restaurant, you order from the menu, and you pay the bill.
Right, that's just how it works.
Exactly. You don't walk into the kitchen with a grocery bag full of raw chicken.
Oh, could you imagine?
Right? You don't hand it to the executive chef and say, hey, my buddy Rick says this just needs to be seared for exactly 4 minutes, so, only charge me for the use of your stove.
Yeah, because you'd be escorted out by security before you even finish the sentence.
Precisely. But step into the world of automotive service, and that boundary completely evaporates. We are looking at a daily, high-stakes conflict at the service desk today.
We really are.
A customer rolls into the drive, pops the trunk, and pulls out a cardboard box of unverified aftermarket parts they bought online. And they announce, my mechanic already figured out what's wrong, you just need to install this.
It is the absolute definition of a professional collision. You have the shop's rigid operational processes crashing head-on into a customer's overwhelming desire to, shortcut the system and save a few dollars.
Exactly. And that is the substantive issue we are tearing apart today. How do you navigate that specific, highly volatile scenario? We are framing this debate around the insights detailed in Brandon Eagle's book, Your Guide to Customer Service, the Mirror Edition.
Which, by the way, is a book that is really starting to sell rapidly right now.
It is, yeah. It is gaining a lot of notoriety among dealerships and service advisors because it explicitly calls out this exact toxic dynamic. It's an unfiltered look at the reality of the service lane.
It's gaining that notoriety because it holds up a mirror to a psychological warfare that advisors have just been told to accept as part of the job for far too long.
Right. So I will be arguing from a structured, policy-first perspective today. As an experienced service manager, my ultimate priority is protecting my team. I argue that strict adherence to shop rules, like requiring a mandatory diagnostic fee and flat-out refusing to install unverified outside parts, is the only logical way to protect technicians and the business from massive liability traps.
And I am taking a strategic, emotionally intelligent perspective. I am looking at the tactical realities of the front line. Because while standing behind a rigid policy sounds great from a manager's office, the reality is that refusing service carries severe, immediate tactical costs.
Okay, sure.
There is the immediate revenue loss that day, the emotional toll on the advisor who has to absorb the confrontation, and the complex challenge of managing a customer's very real threat of destroying your business with a highly visible bad review.
So let me lay out my opening position. When a customer brings a trunk full of internet parts in an unverified diagnosis from their backyard guy, let's just call him Rick, they are not doing your shop a favor. They are handing your dealership a live liability grenade.
Oh, wow.
Truly. From a management perspective, protecting the team is non-negotiable. Saying no to these unverified parts isn't turning away business, It is a fundamental sign of true professionalism.
Right.
There is a brilliant distinction made in Eagle's text. It says, mechanics twist bolts and hope. Technicians diagnose, verify, and document. If we bypass the diagnostic process and just bolt on a mystery part, we are abandoning our expertise. We take on all the legal and financial risk when that car inevitably breaks down again. It is a completely unacceptable risk for any legitimate operation.
I come at it from a different way. I hear the structural logic, but I approach this from the reality of the service drive. I acknowledge the liability, but we have to focus on the strategic fallout in that exact moment.
Which means what exactly on the floor?
It means when an advisor stands their ground and turns away that customer, there is an immediate tangible revenue loss for the day. That is labor inventory that expires the second the clock ticks past 5 p.m. Furthermore, that customer isn't just going to nod and peacefully exit.
No, they never do.
Exactly. They are going to weaponize their dissatisfaction. They will threaten a 1-star review, demand to see the general manager, and launch into a public tirade in your waiting room. The core tension is balancing that immediate financial hit and the massive emotional toll on the advisor against the abstract concept of your shop's long-term reputation.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. That long-term reputation isn't abstract at all. It is built entirely on the foundation of the diagnostic fee. We have to view that diagnostic fee as a non-negotiable protective boundary.
Okay, but how do you explain that to a screaming customer?
By explaining the actual mechanism. Finding the root cause of a vehicle's issue isn't just plugging in a scanner, like these customers claim. If a customer brings you an aftermarket mass airflow sensor and you just bolt it on, they think it's a simple swap.
Right. Unplug one, plug the other in.
Exactly. But how that cheap sensor communicates with the CAN bus matters. If it misreports voltage by even a fraction, it can cause a transmission to shift hard and eventually fail. Now the customer comes back furious, claiming you ruined their transmission, all because you agreed to bolt on a $30 piece of plastic they bought online to save $1.
I mean, I understand the voltage issue, and I know how the CAN bus works. But let's look at the advisor's reality. You are dealing with a customer archetype I call the diagnostic denier.
The diagnostic denier, that's a great term.
Right? They view the diagnostic fee as a scam. To them, the intellectual heavy lifting is already done because Rick figured it out. So the advisor tries to enforce the diagnostic fee, and the customer threatens to walk. It's like a patient asking a surgeon to skip the MRI and just start cutting to save money.
And the surgeon says no, immediately, without hesitation, because to do otherwise is malpractice.
Right, but in a hospital, security removes the patient. In a dealership, the strategic cost of enforcing that fee is the immediate hostility the advisor has to stand there and absorb. That confrontation derails their focus for the next 10 customers.
That's just part of the job, though.
Is it? You're asking an advisor who is paid on commission and throughput to willingly take a financial hit and get yelled at just to uphold your policy?
But that hostility is exactly why you have to hold the line. Because if you cave just to get them out of your face, you haven't solved the problem. You've just bought the liability for when that cheap part fails.
I'm not saying you just blindly cave.
But giving in validates their premise that the technician's brain power is worth $0. The text hits this perfectly. It says, go to your job and don't clock in for 2 hours. Use your skills, solve a problem, and then walk away unpaid. That's what you're asking a technician to do.
I am not saying the technician shouldn't be paid. I am pointing out the mechanism of the conflict. The customer says, just install this part. The advisor says no. Now the advisor is standing there losing labor hours for the shop.
Right.
Plus, they are practically guaranteeing that the customer will go online and post a scathing public review claiming the dealership was unhelpful, rude, or trying to scam them into buying overpriced dealer parts.
Which brings us to the core concept of asymmetric risk. The customer is engaging in an unauthorized risk transfer. They want to save $50 on a part, but they want to transfer $5,000 of reputational and legal liability onto the shop.
That's a fair point.
Brandon Eagle's golden rule of the service drive is, if we touch it, we own it. Installing a customer-supplied part is like co-signing a mortgage for a stranger. You get absolutely none of the upside. You didn't make a margin on the part, but the moment they default on that backyard diagnosis, the bank is coming after your reputation.
Yes, but here is the explicit debate question we have to wrestle with. Does the shop's long-term reputation truly outweigh a single customer's threat of a highly visible bad review?
I would argue absolutely yes.
But in today's digital landscape, a one-star review that goes viral or a series of bad surveys that drag down the shop's average causes massive, quantifiable damage to future revenue. The customer knows they hold this power. They leverage the Google review to force the shop into accepting their mystery box of parts.
Wait, let me stop you right there. You are saying the immediate revenue lost that day and the fear of a bad review are the primary strategic concerns?
From the frontline perspective, yes.
But how are you calculating that revenue? Because if my technician throws on a garbage alternator today and it fails on Thursday, the labor I lose fixing it for free on Friday wipes out whatever phantom profit I made on Tuesday. So isn't saving the day's revenue just an illusion?
It is an illusion for the business owner, yes, but it is not an illusion for the service advisor whose paycheck is tied to CSI, Customer Service Index scores.
Ah, the CSI scores.
Exactly. The source material notes this explicitly. Thousands of dollars a year can hinge on these surveys. When an advisor enforces this rigid policy, they aren't just protecting the shop's liability, they are potentially sacrificing their own mortgage payment if that customer gets a survey and tanks their score out of spite.
And that exposes a fundamental flaw in how manufacturer performance metrics are structured, which the book rightfully criticizes. You cannot let a broken survey system dictate mechanical reality.
But it does dictate the reality.
I know, but focusing solely on the threat of the review ignores the statistical probability of a comeback. If you install that mystery part, it will likely fail. Rick misdiagnosed it. Now you have a comeback cascade.
Explain the cascade for a second.
Sure. The part fails, the car is towed back. Now you have a furious customer demanding a free rental car. You have a bay tied up that could have been used for a $1,500 brake job.
Right.
And you have a technician who is absolutely livid because they are being forced to work for free to fix a problem they didn't diagnose in the first place. The long-term brand impact and internal cultural damage of a comeback far exceeds the immediate revenue of that single labor charge.
I actually agree with the math on the comeback, but you are arguing from a purely mechanical and financial spreadsheet. I look at this through the lens of workplace boundaries and emotional intelligence.
Okay, go on.
The reason you don't install the part isn't just about the CAN bus or the legal contract. True professionalism is having the emotional intelligence to let toxic revenue walk out the door.
Toxic revenue. That is exactly what it is.
Right, because refusing the work isn't just about protecting the car. It is about a manager protecting the mental bandwidth of their service advisors. If you let the "my mechanic said" customer bypass the rules, you force your advisor to manage a fundamentally broken relationship from the start.
I agree completely.
Taking on that mystery box of parts to appease a demanding customer is a short-term comfort that causes long-term psychological pain for your staff. By refusing that transaction, you establish a boundary that protects your team's sanity.
Which is why the policy must be absolute. By setting that boundary up front, by looking the customer in the eye and saying, we don't install outside parts and we don't work off unverified diagnoses, the advisor eliminates the ambiguity.
In theory.
Well, if the customer wants dealership-level accountability, they have to let the technicians do dealership-level work from start to finish. There is no middle ground where you get a corporate warranty for a backyard guess.
That looks great on paper, but walk with me onto the actual service drive. We're talking to service advisors who desperately need professional workplace boundaries, but they need to know how to hold that line without internalizing the abuse.
It takes a tough skin, for sure.
It does. Customers will try to shift the responsibility verbally. They will say, look, I know it's my part. If you just throw it on, I promise I won't hold you responsible if it breaks.
Oh, that is absolute fiction.
Of course it's fiction. The moment the part fails, the customer's memory becomes highly selective. Suddenly, it's not my bad part, it's your bad installation.
Exactly. And this is why the diagnostic process is a structural filter. The diagnostic fee isn't just a cover charge to get into the shop.
Right.
It filters out the people who want to outsource their risk for free, and it leaves you with customers who respect the process. It gives the customer a documented path to a fix. If management caves to avoid a confrontation, they undermine that entire filter.
But you are assuming management always backs the advisor. What happens when the customer bypasses the advisor, storms into the showroom, corners the service director, and starts threatening to call the corporate office?
That is a disaster.
It is. If management caves in that moment for a one-time feel-good save to quiet the noise, the entire policy structure collapses. The advisor takes the shrapnel, enforces the rule, gets yelled at, and then watches their boss give the customer exactly what they want.
And you're right, that happens. But you're arguing for short-term survival while sacrificing the war. If leadership caves just because someone is yelling in the showroom, that manager didn't, quote, save a customer. They just announce to every advisor on the floor that their boundaries mean nothing.
Right.
They just told the technician that their diagnostic expertise is entirely optional if the customer is loud enough. You cannot run a facility that manages complex, high-liability machinery through appeasement. You cannot negotiate with physics, and you shouldn't negotiate with someone carrying a trash bag full of internet parts.
I am not suggesting we negotiate with the trash bag of parts. I am pushing back on your premise that a rigid wall of policy magically solves the interaction.
It doesn't solve it magically, but it creates the framework.
I see the policy as a tool to manage human behavior, not just a shield to hide behind. The goal is to manage the interaction so the customer understands why the rule exists. It's about educating them.
Right, explaining the why.
Exactly. You have to explain that the diagnostic fee protects them from guess and hope repairs. But if they refuse to be educated, then yes, you have to let them walk. You have to be okay with the immediate revenue loss because the emotional and reputational cost of a comeback is strategically devastating.
It sounds like we are zeroing in on the same necessary outcome, just arriving there through different mechanisms.
I think we are.
Let's summarize where this debate has taken us. From my perspective, relying on strict policy, enforcing mandatory diagnostic processes, and flatly refusing outside parts is simply the only logical way to maintain a dealership's integrity.
Right.
It is how an experienced service manager protects their technicians from taking the fall for a backyard mechanic's bad guess. The diagnostic fee protects the technician's livelihood and the shop's legal standing. Saying no to unverified parts is not bad customer service. It is the ultimate sign of professional responsibility.
And from my perspective, while the policy is a necessary foundation, we have to acknowledge the very real strategic cost of saying no on the front line. It involves taking an immediate hit to the daily labor inventory, and it asks the advisor to absorb significant emotional blowback and the very real threat of weaponized bad reviews.
Which is heavy.
Very heavy. But ultimately, having the emotional intelligence to set those professional workplace boundaries and letting toxic revenue walk out the door is what preserves the long-term brand reputation and team morale. You cannot build a healthy, profitable business by appeasing customers who demand you take on their liability for free.
We are clearly aligned on the ultimate goal, protecting the team and the integrity of the work. But the friction between the temptation of immediate customer appeasement and the reality of long-term liability is never going to disappear.
No, it won't.
It is an asymmetric risk that will always be a daily tightrope for service advisors and management alike. We will leave the ultimate judgment of how to walk that line to the listener.
It is a balancing act every single day. And it makes you reflect on the value of looking in the mirror, as Brandon Eagle suggests. We have to look at ourselves both as service providers setting boundaries and as consumers who might occasionally demand the impossible without realizing the liability we are trying to force onto someone else.
That is a phenomenal point. There are many more nuanced customer archetypes and complex psychological dynamics to explore in this material. It truly exposes the hidden mechanics of these daily interactions.
So the next time you find yourself tempted to ask a professional to just skip the diagnosis and bolt on a cheap part, maybe take a step back and look at the massive risk you are actually asking them to assume.
A brilliant thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.
Brandon Eagle, your guide to customer service. Grab your copy today on Amazon Kindle or as an Amazon bookstore paperback. It's a fast-paced, humorous, and highly practical survival guide that cuts right through all that corporate fluff, teach you how to actually handle customers and build a strong professional presence. Ultimately, it's about transforming everyday service industry nightmares into empowered professional partnerships. This is absolutely a must-read for anyone wanting to level up their customer service skills and confidence. So go ahead and grab your copy today on Amazon Kindle or as an Amazon bookstore paperback.
Thank you for listening to Discover You Radio's discussions. we'd like to invite you to research who was spotlighted on this episode. And if they have a website, join their mailing list. You never know. They just may become the next legendary legacy through Discover You Radio. Because listeners like you made it possible. Thank you for your support.